Hello, History 363. So today we're going to talk about the tribunate of Tiberius Gracchus and how his attempts at agrarian reform ultimately lead to his assassination and the introduction of violence into Roman political discourse and practice. Now, we talked last time about how there does seem to be, whatever your exact model of Italian demographics, there does seem to be real hunger and desire for agrarian reform amongst the Roman peasantry, who also are the voters. This is finally, and actually, I should say, another issue. In fact, one reason why farmers are perhaps feeling the stress is, why wasn't there demands for agrarian reform in, I don't know, the 3rd century BC or the 2nd century BC? Well, there were, and they were met. All of that colonization, all of that Wiritan allotments had the effect of distributing huge amounts of land in Italy and in Cisalpine Gaul. Remember, I keep referencing all that military activity in Cisalpine Gaul. That's also leading to colonization and land distribution. And so what that means is, when there's growing population in the 3rd and 2nd century BC, particularly in the first part of the 2nd century BC, when the population begins to grow probably relatively rapidly after the casualties of the Hannibalic War, there's a way to take that pressure off. You simply send out new colonies, and people who don't have enough land, or the 2nd or 3rd son of a moderately prosperous peasant, can say, you know what, I'm going to join the new colony at Aquileia rather than necessarily staying with my brothers and getting a smaller and smaller share of the pie. So this is, for a while, that need for agrarian reform is met. And of course, here's the thing. One reason why that colonization is easy is you're giving away someone else's land. You're giving away land that was taken from disloyal Italian allies who rebelled after the Hannibalic War. They lose a lot of land, and now you can put colonists on it. Or you're taking away from the Celts and Ligurians who live up in northern Italy. They're the losers. You've already committed ethnic cleansing or genocide against them. Now you can simply settle your people on the land. And so it's politically easy. To make an analogy, it's also one reason why massive land distribution in the 19th century US was easily someone else's land. There wasn't a vested interest who would lose that land. Now, one problem is by the late 2nd century, that goes away, that all of the land in Italy belongs to someone, either to Roman citizens, including big landed aristocrats, or to wealthy Italian allies who have been loyal for generations now, and therefore there's no way you can really take it away from them. And what is notable is the last colony that we hear being established is in 177 BC, and then after that, we hear nothing more. Now, it should be noted, we of course lose Livy, our primary source for the establishment of Roman colonies, after 167 BC. But still, there's nothing between 177 and 167, and even in the Cliff Notes Livy that we have, the Parochoi, we don't hear of any references to colonies. So this suggests that maybe, and again, there have been some who argue maybe there was 1 or 2 more colonies, but it basically suggests that land distribution through colonization has come to an end in the 2nd century BC, and that's an additional indicator of why there is agrarian unrest. There would have been some before, but the policy that had been alleviating it has now gone away. So enter into the scene Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. We've met him before. He was the quaestor of Hostilius Mancinus at Numantia when the Roman army is forced to surrender, and he's the one, because his father had been the praetor in Spain in the 170s and has a good relation. The name, that family name, resonates in Spain. He arranges the treaty that allows the army to leave alive. Now, on one hand, some people think of him as a hero, a young aristocrat who saves the legions of Roman citizens. But this also seems to really mar his political career. Remember, when the Roman Senate is debating, well, what should we do to abrogate this treaty? Some say, let's send Mancinus, the consul, and let's send his quaestor, Tiberius Gracchus, and maybe even all of the military tribunes and centurions who had also sworn to uphold the treaty,
the Numantines require an oath before they let the Roman army go. Let's send all of them back naked and bound up to the Numantines. And the forces of mercy prevail, and only Hostilius Mancinus suffers this fate. But Gracchus is implicated, and it seems that this is a kind of stain on his political ambitions. Now, Tiberius Gracchus is not some kind of plebeian upstart. I mean, he is plebeian, but he's definitely not an upstart. Remember, he belongs to one of the most splendid of the plebeian noble families. You've probably been hearing the name Sempronius several times, the consul who fought at the Battle of the Ticinus River, and Trebia is a Sempronius Gracchus. His father had been a praetor in Spain and then a consul. Not only that, Tiberius Gracchus is the grandson of Scipio Africanus, patrician, but his father had married Scipio's daughter, Cornelia. So he's directly related to Scipio Africanus. His own father-in-law is a splendid patrician aristocrat, Appius Claudius. And so this is a guy who is from one of the finest plebeian lineages, is deeply connected to some of the finest patrician lineages. He is not just some kind of low-life politician who's trying to stir the pot. Nonetheless, he does have, I would say, a bit of a problem, that the surrender at Numantia has kind of set him back. And if he wants to go forward up the Cursus Honorum, it seems that he decides he needs to do something big. Now, for a plebeian, serving as tribune of the plebs is just a normal part of the Cursus Honorum. And so he runs for tribune of the plebs. And this gives him the power to call the assembly to pass legislation. This is a way, if you want to do something big, you really do have the opportunity to do something big. So Tiberius Gracchus puts together an agrarian law. And this agrarian law is going to try to free up ager publicus, public land, that is land that is held by the Roman people as a kind of commons. There's a huge amount of this in Italy. Now there's a problem with public land. A lot of it is not as public as it could be. Namely, it seems that the Romans have been renting it out, oftentimes at extremely low, even nominal rates, to well-connected people. I mean, remember, if we go all the way back to the Licinian Sextian rogations of 367, the key one establishes the access to plebeians for the consulship. But there's also a provision that says no one can occupy more than 500 jugera of public land, of ager publicus. And it seems this provision has fallen by the wayside. So what you have, oftentimes by wealthy aristocrats, is people occupying a very large amount of public land, paying at best nominal rents. And it kind of seems that families that have been occupying this for a while kind of just start to treat it as their land. Yes, it's technically ager publicus, but we've been farming it for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 generations. And of course, that's land that now can't be used by peasants. So he says, what we're going to do is we're going to do a survey. We're going to take away land that is held in excess of 500 jugera. And then we're going to set up a commission to distribute that land to poor Romans, particularly the proletarii, so that they can have land to live on. So this is the law. Now, this is likely to be a popular law. Indeed, Gracchus is supported by his father-in-law and a clique of relatively powerful nobiles. There is a faction on his side. Now, that being said, there is one tribune named Octavius who says, I'm going to veto your ability to call the assembly and pass this law. This is technically legal. Tribunes can veto the actions of one another, and this can be used as a way of halting, essentially filibustering legislation. Gracchus is frustrated that there is this veto against him, and therefore he comes up with his own kind of constitutional hardball. And that constitutional hardball, he says, I'm going to call the assembly, and I'm going to recall you. And as far as we know, this is technically constitutional. I don't think it's ever been done, or we have any evidence that it's ever been done, but the other tribunes go along, and so an assembly is called, and Octavius is unelected as tribune of the plebs, and this clears the way for the passage of Tiberius's agrarian law. Now, there's one other bit of constitutional hardball that Tiberius has played in passing this law. He hasn't first gotten a senatus consultum, a decree of the Senate saying that the Senate approves the law and it should be brought before the people. This is a pretty pro forma thing that generally tribunes do for uncontroversial laws. Because there's enough opposition to the Senate, he hasn't done that. And incidentally, as far as we can tell, that's totally okay. There's never been a legal requirement that you have the Senate's approval for a tribune of the plebs to pass a law. That actually wouldn't even make sense if there's such a requirement. It's just kind of a norm that Tiberius is breaking. So Tiberius passes his law, and this creates an agrarian commission. The people on the commission are, incidentally, Tiberius Gracchus, his father-in-law, Appius Claudius, and Fulvius Flaccus, a very strong aristocratic supporter. Now, this fact alone may be something that really is worrisome to the kind of senatorial elite. One thing when we look at how colonization is done historically is the Romans, whenever they establish a colony, always make sure that it's done by committee. And of course, most colonies, which are small, maybe distributing land to 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people, will have 3 men, triumviri as the committee that runs the colony. But those 3 guys are only getting credit for a very small amount of land distribution. We know when bigger land distributions are made, sometimes that number gets bumped up to 10 men, decemviri, probably precisely so that the credit for a lot of grateful peasants who've gotten land is widely distributed amongst 10 guys. No 1 or 2 guys gets that political capital. Tiberius Gracchus's committee is likely going to distribute land to upwards, and this is an estimate, but upwards of 75,000 people. There's going to be 75 grateful peasants. Oh, Tiberius Gracchus, thank you for our land. And that gratitude is going to be distributed amongst only 3 guys, Tiberius and 2 of his strongest supporters. That fact alone is probably going to alarm the Senate quite a bit. And indeed, one thing that they do to kind of stymie him is the Senate has traditionally controlled the money. That is, if you want to go, the consuls are usually allowed to take a set amount of money to pay their legions when they leave, and everyone kind of knows what a legion costs. But if you want to take money out of the treasury, you need the Senate's approval. It's one of the de facto powers of the Senate that ultimately represents a very real, concrete power. So the Senate won't let Tiberius Gracchus have any money for his commission to even do something as simple as put up a tent in the forum so that they can conduct their business in the shade. It also seems that if this program really wants to work, you just can't give someone land. Like, yeah, there's your land, go take it. If you want them to be a successful farmer, you may need to provide them with some seed capital, maybe quite literally. So it's possible that that's something that the commission had envisioned, and the Senate is saying no. So Tiberius Gracchus starts feeling around for a possible funding, and he finds it in a just kind of fortuitous circumstance. The last king of Pergamon, Attalus III, has died, and died without an heir. And it seems that there's a kind of just strategy to prevent himself from being murdered without an heir. He said, if I die, I will my kingdom to the Roman people. This may initially again just be a kind of strategy to prevent any kind of assassination coup. But when he does die, that will still is in effect. And the Senate is actually like, I don't know, do we want to actually provincialize Pergamon? Tiberius Gracchus says, hell yeah. So he passes a law that says we will accept this inheritance, and the kingdom of Pergamon is going to become territory of the Roman people. And he also passes a law saying the revenues from Pergamon can be used to fund my agrarian commission. So right there, on one hand, he solved his problem for funding this big, massive agricultural program. The downside is he's now usurped as tribune 2 conventional de facto powers of the Senate. 1, foreign affairs, and 2, finances again. And so this right now has a lot of senators, even if they've been moderately supportive of the basic idea of like, oh, there's a lot of Roman peasants who need some land and maybe we should do something about that. They are now really livid and maybe even worried at the kind of power that Tiberius Gracchus as an individual who's able to call an assembly anytime he wants and get huge earth-shattering, norm-breaking legislation passed, this seems to make them very anxious. I mean, remember, one thing about an aristocracy is you usually are kind of trying to keep everybody in check. You don't want one person to amass too much power. Tiberius Gracchus realizes this, and he also seems to realize that it's highly likely that someone will try to charge him with essentially treason, perdulo, once he leaves the tribunate. And so therefore, whereas most tribunes serve 1 year and then try to keep working their way up the cursus honorum so that they can reach the consulship, Tiberius Gracchus does something, again, somewhat unprecedented or outside of the norm, and that is he tries to run for tribune again. Now, is this unconstitutional? No. There is no, we do know that there are laws against iterative consulships. Indeed, probably around 180, the Romans pass a law saying you can't be consul for a second time unless 10 years have intervened. That had previously been a norm, sometimes broken in military emergencies, say, Fabius Maximus. But it becomes a law after 180. We do know, but as far as we know, that law does not apply to the tribunate. Most people just leave because it's not that high of an office. There's 10 of you. You want to keep moving up so you can get more and more prestigious offices. One that we do know, though, if we look at Roman history in the say the 5th century, there is evidence of some tribunes serving several consecutive terms, and that doesn't seem to have been controversial. So it's running for tribune again isn't illegal or unconstitutional. That said, the idea that Tiberius Gracchus could potentially run for tribune not just next year, but the year after next year, and therefore always be sacrosanct. Remember, tribunes, if they want, can throw the consuls into jail. Sometimes they threaten to throw the consuls off the Tarpeian Rock, the cliff on the Capitol line. And so I think all of a sudden people realize, wait, no one's ever tried to do this before, but Tiberius Gracchus could actually entrench himself in a kind of permanent power that would include the ability to pass big controversial legislation if he continues his run. And so, therefore, a group of senators, including one of Tiberius's own cousins, the Pontifex Maximus Scipio Nasica, resolve to assassinate Tiberius. They are literally in the Senate. They take their benches and smash them up to use into cudgels. They rush out into the forum where Tiberius is standing, and after a brief scuffle, they beat him and a number of their supporters to death. When you think about it, that escalation seems to have been relatively sudden. It doesn't seem to have been particularly planned, but it is shocking, right, how quickly violence is introduced into the discourse of aristocratic politics. I mean, this is not some kind of mob rule. This is a cudgeling, a lynching that is spontaneously executed by some of the most splendid statesmen in the Roman Republic. And all of a sudden, they are rushing out to beat one of their fellow aristocrats to death. It is shocking, and in a way, I think myself and I think other historians struggle to actually explain what a startling turn of events this is. So Tiberius is killed along with a number of his supporters. They then set up a commission, a court, a special court that is authorized to try and execute a number of Tiberius's supporters. The Land Commission continues to function. Tiberius is dead. They clearly were worried about Tiberius, but his Land Commission less so. It continues to exist. It continues to distribute land. We actually have some of the boundary stones that are put up by the Agrarian Commission, and it's quite likely they do distribute a substantial amount of land while they function. The third spot on the Land Commission is taken by Tiberius's younger brother, Gaius Gracchus. More on him soon. However, the commission runs into problems by 129, and that is a lot of the land, a lot of ager publicus, Roman public land, is still being leased, oftentimes at nominal rents, by very wealthy soci, by Italians, by non-citizen Italians. And indeed, it's quite likely that oftentimes the scenario is Rome defeats some Italian community either in the 4th or 3rd century or during the Hannibalic War, if it's rebelled. The Romans say, okay, we're going to take some of your land. They say, okay, this is ager publicus. But then they say, you know, we don't really have a lot of use for this right now. Do you guys want to rent it back from us? And so there's a number of wealthy Italian landowners who have been farming Roman agri publicus for, again, generations, and again have kind of come to view it as theirs, in the same way that, you know, people in an apartment that technically they're renting oftentimes view it as theirs if their, you know, landlord is trying to evict them. These Italians are like, no, this is our land. You can't take it away from us just because we're farming, you know, 600 jugera instead of 500. And so these Italians petition in Rome. And their cause is taken up by Scipio Aemilius. Scipio Aemilius was actually, when this whole saga with his cousin Tiberius Gracchus is going down, not just his cousin, his brother-in-law as well, is going down. Scipio Aemilianus is in Numantia, finally crushing the Numantines. Probably another something that's embarrassing to Tiberius Gracchus. That kind of source of potential shame and taint is being settled in the year of his tribunate. But now Scipio Aemilianus is back, and when the Italians petition, Scipio Aemilianus supports a new policy that in which if the Italians have an issue with the Agrarian Commission, it has to be brought to the consuls in Rome. That is, their cases can't be judged by the commission itself. It has to be judged before the consuls. Now, the consuls aren't in Rome very often. Remember, they leave pretty quickly to go to the provinces. So this effectively shuts the commission down. If it wants to distribute land now, and it seems that a lot of the land left is being occupied by Italian soci, the excess land. If it wants to survey and distribute that, now anytime there's a claim, it goes to the consuls and like, oh, where's the consul? Well, he went to this province. There won't be another consul in Rome for 9 months. So this effectively stymies the Agrarian Commission to the point that it doesn't seem to be particularly active or effective after 129 BC. Although, nonetheless, it does seem to distribute plots, possibly to many tens of thousands of Roman farmers. So what we will talk about next time, having had this shocking murder in the middle of the Roman Forum, will be the more comprehensive reforms of Gaius Gracchus, who nonetheless meets the same violent fate. So we will talk about that next time. I'll see you then.